Thanks for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. If the show helps you, help us grow. Subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube channel for clips and full episodes. And consider supporting the work with a membership for $10 a month. Members get subscriber-only series like Influences and Inspiration and behind-the-scenes pit videos, plus deep-dive training pieces in our real-world training collection. We're excited about our new book, Broadway Bound and Beyond. It's a practical guide to building a theater career. We cover getting your first shot, prepping to sub, mastering the click, reading the room, working with conductors, balancing 8 show weeks, negotiating, and treating your music like a business. Want updates and launch access? Sign up to be notified at BroadwayBoundBook.com. Thanks for being part of this community. Keep listening and keep learning.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Larry Lelli. He's done 15 million shows. I can't list them all here, but we're going to go over them one by one. Thank you for being a part of this, Larry. It's great to see you again.
Thanks, Clayton. It's good to be here.
The question I usually ask a lot of my guests, most of my guests, all of my guests is, where are you from?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm from all over. I was born in Chicago, and I grew up all around the Midwest, mostly in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And once I went to college at University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire, which was a jazz school there. I went for jazz performance and percussion and conducting. And then I lived in Minneapolis for 3 years, and I outgrew that scene. Then I lived in Nashville for 3 years.
Were you part of a military family that traveled a lot, or you just happened to wind up?
Just my mom had 2 kids and trying to make it happen, and we moved around a whole lot when we were kids.
Was there something that spoke to you that made you want to play drums?
Yeah, it was what I wanted to do since I was born. They're my earliest memories. And there are pictures of me that I don't remember as a little kid with grabbing whatever and banging on whatever. It's just what I had a predisposition to do when I was born. And my mom said I was very active like that as a young kid too, like just always wanting to move and groove and that kind of thing.
Do you come from a musical family?
No, that's the funny part. Not at all. I don't.
One?
Yeah. One of my aunts did play piano and a little bit of trumpet, but it wasn't her main thing. It was just something she did for fun. Apparently, I have a great grandfather that I never met who was like a gypsy musician. He played every instrument, and that's what he did, but I never met him. I never knew him, but he was the only one that we could find that had any musical talents or skills. Everybody else, I was very much like the odd one out in my family. They didn't know what to do with me.
Your mother brought you a drum set, or did she get you enrolled in a series of lessons?
Yeah, at the school, I told them I wanted to play drums like in grade school, and they said, no, we've got too many drummers, so here's a trombone. And yeah, I really struggled with that thing for a year, and I just didn't like it. And luckily, the next year we moved to a new school system, and the band director at that school system, luckily, was like, we did our entrance exam or something on the trombone, and I was like, I hate this thing. He's okay, what would you rather be doing? And I said, I want to play drums. He said, great, you can be in the percussion section. Great. And so I started getting, they let me be in the percussion section, then they realized I couldn't read music at all. So they had the teacher from the high school come and start tutoring me and a couple other young students who showed an interest in drums and percussion privately, which was great because then I was like, oh, okay. And now I start to get how this is going. And then eventually I complained enough, and my mom did break down and buy me a drum set eventually. And it was the best day of my life. I sat down and instantly knew how to play.
Really?
Nobody knew, including myself, how I knew what to do, but I just did.
Do you remember what kind of drum set it was?
It was a Slingerland Red Ripple, like from the 60s, a 4-piece, like a jazz kit. And it had the cymbal mounted on the kick drum with that little suspension arm thing. And it was the best. It sounded like crap because it was all beat up and nobody had taken care of it or anything. But man, it was the best day of my life.
You were playing in the basement during those times?
Of course.
Did you play in marching bands back then?
Once I got into high school, that was part of the deal. If you were going to play in the concert band, or the wind ensemble, you had to play in the marching band in the fall. That turned out to be one of the best things for me because that led me into drum corps. I got really into it. So I got into drum corps and marched drum corps for many years and played snare drum. And it was like, just blew my world wide open. I was full time playing music 24/7, basically.
Which drum corps was it?
I started out with the Blue Stars, which was one of the big DCI corps, and it was based in the town that I was in at the time, which was La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I only got to play with them for 1 year, and they went bankrupt. And I was so depressed. But luckily, the town also had a baton and drum corps. And so when the Blue Stars went defunct, the baton and drum corps was called Warriors. They came and grabbed all the drummers out of that corps and got us into the baton and drum corps. So I marched baton and drum corps for, I think, the next 3 years or something. So every summer we were touring around playing competitions and parades and all that kind of stuff. It was a blast.
Is there a difference with baton and drum corps?
Yeah, baton and drum corps means you only have the drum line, the drum section, and a bunch of baton and color guard twirlers with the flags and batons. There are no brass instruments, as opposed to regular drum corps for Drum Corps International, which is all the brass instruments. It's a very different scene, but I was thrilled because we still got to play all summer. It was all focused on just the drum line. We were the only ones who produced any music. So we had a mallet section and then all the traditional drumline instruments, quads and all the different pitched bass drums and the snare line, and all these pretty girls who were twirling batons and flags and stuff. Oh, this is great.
Instrument did you play in drum section?
I played snare drum as well.
Did you play both or did you play one style?
In Blue Stars, they started us out with traditional grip. And that was my introduction to that because I had never studied any kind of technique up to that point. But as soon as they went bust and I joined Warriors, wanted everybody playing matched grip, which was great because that way I could really develop more equally on both sides. So that's what we ended up doing. And that's what I played. Then I played match grip for all of my high school years. And then I switched again to traditional grip when I got into college because I got so into jazz and all my jazz heroes were playing traditional grip. So I thought that's what you had to do. That's how you got the feel and the sound. So I taught myself to play traditional grip once I got in college.
When you were in high school, since you had your drums in the garage or the basement, did you have chances to play with other musicians and playing rock bands, country bands, jazz bands?
Yeah, that's a good question. I formed a heavy metal band when I was in 9th grade with a bunch of my friends who were in the 10th grade. We had that band all throughout high school for 4 years. It was in different carnations and people would come and go, but the core of the band stayed the same. And that's what I was doing in high school. I was totally into metal and whatever kind of music was popular in the 80s. I'm dating myself now, but.
All right. So what was the name of the band? I'm curious.
Our first name was Fallen Angel, but then a made-for-TV movie came out that was called Fallen Angel. That's a terrible movie, and everybody knew about it, so we had to change the name. So we changed the name to Perfect Stranger. That was our eventual final name, I think.
And who were your heroes back then? If your band could open up for one of your heroes back then, who would you have preferred to open?
Oh, man, that's tricky because it probably would have been like Motley Crue, or who else were we really into back then? Poison. I think we went to see them in concert. Yeah. All those hair metal bands back then.
Round and Round. Oh,
yes.
I got to tell you, I never liked that stuff, man. I liked Motley Crue. It was Tommy Lee, man. That his feel and just the way he looked. Great cover. They had some grooves too, man. Like Dr. Feelgood and she's got what's that? Looks That Kill. That shit is rocking, man.
Yep. And we were into all that, man. And Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper and all that stuff. We were into all of it.
It's going back to when you got your first drum set. Were there any drummers that made you say, man, that sounds cool, I want to play like this person?
I pretty much was trying to copy everybody that I was hearing. And back then, the radio was the biggest thing. I was living in a small town in Wisconsin. And so whatever I heard on the radio, I would try to copy. And it didn't really matter who it was or what kind of music it was. I was listening and absorbing everything. My mom at that time was listening to country music. Even though it wasn't something that I longed to play, I would listen to it and absorb it. And I never knew who was playing drums on most of the stuff when you're just listening on the radio. But once I started being able to buy albums and going to the library and check out records, I was really into the session drummers at the time. And I would look at the credits and check them out. And so they were all those guys like Steve Gadd and Hal Blaine. Yeah, Picaro, of course.
John Robbins.
Yes, JR. All those cats who were playing on all the pop records that were coming out at the time. So I totally got into that stuff. And Gadd really, once I figured out who Gadd was and what he was doing, I mean, that really was just opened, it blew my mind. And I started trying to really transcribe stuff to my basic notation at that point, my basic notation skills. I tried to write out what he was doing. I just listened to it over and over again and try to figure out on my own what was going on, trying to recreate the sounds. And I remember another one that blew me away was Terry Bozzio. When I started getting
Missing Persons.
Oh, wow. Those parts were orchestrated. And I had to first of all figure out what could be making those sounds that he was playing. Because it wasn't just standard drum set sounds. Because he was using stuff like rototoms and different pitched bells and cymbals and things like that back then. And it still does. So just whatever I could do to mimic all these drummers, which ended up being one of the best things for me with getting into Broadway, which is where I'm eventually going, I'm sure, because I taught myself how to learn and how to play by listening and absorbing and recreating somebody else's playing. It taught me how to get into Broadway and be able to start subbing and sit next to a drummer and absorb what they were doing and go in and recreate what they were doing instead of being like, oh, I'm the drummer and I'm going to do my thing. Because that's how most of us get in, is by subbing at first. It ended up being one of the best things for me, is learning by listening when I was a kid.
When you were in high school, you were doing the drum and baton or drum corps and playing in marching bands. Was there any thought of saying, I want to go to college and study business? I want to be safe. I want to go study chemistry or something like that. Did you have any other interests, or was it just, I'm just going to be a musician and that's going to be it?
I didn't have really any other interest, but my family tried to push me that way, saying music is very risky and you don't know if you're going to make any money and it's hard to get jobs and whatever. So maybe you want to think about a backup career, a backup plan, right? And I just never wanted to have anything to do with that. So I struggled with it a little bit, as everybody may do when you're getting advised by people who are older than you about this is what you should do. But I just couldn't, my heart was just saying, this is what I want to do. I want to play and I'll figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, then I'll worry about a backup plan. But I knew if I didn't at least try to do what I wanted, which was just make music, make a living by making music, no matter how that happened, I wouldn't have been satisfied. I wouldn't have been happy. I would have been always wondering, what if? It was that strong in me. And that's luckily what one of my kind of mentors said to me when I was about to strike out and go out on my own and say, okay, I'm going to be a musician. And he said to me, is it the thing you must do? And I said, yeah, I have to then. If there's no other doubt in your mind, if there's no other thing in your mind that you would rather do, he said, if you need to play and make music, then that's how you know that's what you got to do.
That's great advice. Got to give that to my daughter.
Excellent. A good dad.
Passing on this wisdom. I asked this question because I had the same kind of situation when I was going to go to college. I was like, Dad, I just want to go to Berkeley. And he's, nope, you're going to study accounting?
Yeah.
So I went and studied accounting.
Yeah.
Wound up becoming mildly successful.
Did you ever go to Berkeley, though?
I did not. I went to Howard University in D.C. Yeah. Oh, I loved every minute.
There's musicians there.
But speaking of Berklee, why not Berklee or Juilliard or any other conservatory for yourself?
Again, coming from where I was coming from, and at that point, when I was in high school and starting to decide this is what I want to do, I didn't come from money. There was no money to be had, and it was basically just scary. I had nobody that I knew that had actually gone to Berklee or University of North Texas or Miami or any of the big music schools at the time that I knew of. I was being groomed to attend the college that I ended up attending, which is the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire, because the drum and jazz professor there, Ron Keiser, had met me when I was doing state solo and ensemble competition for the concert band and stuff like that. And he saw that I had some talent. They would go out across the state, their band would tour, they would meet young players in high school, see developing talent, and entice them to come to Eau Claire because they were trying to build that jazz department there. It was a really smart thing they were doing back then. They threw a scholarship my way saying, we'd love you to come here. I got another scholarship from my high school that if I went there, I would get this scholarship. It was natural for me to go there instead of going out, and because, man, I couldn't even afford the $50 application fee for Berklee. I remember getting the application. You had to do it all by the mail back then. And I got the application, I'm filling it out, and then it says, include your $50 application fee. And I was like, I don't have that. My parents didn't have that. I couldn't even afford to apply there at the time. So I was very lucky that the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire ended up developing an incredible jazz program while I was there. I was a freshman when they hired their new jazz professor, Robert Baca, and he took over the department and he developed that jazz program into one of the best in the world. And I happened to be right there at that exact time. I was very lucky to go there.
So University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire.
Yeah.
Did you graduate with a degree in jazz performance or jazz studies or just music in general?
Yeah, it's a Bachelor of Music Performance degree, and then you have an emphasis in something. And I did percussion and jazz. And then I also had an emphasis in conducting because I had this lofty dream that I would move to one of the big music cities and conduct film scores. I thought that's what I was going to end up doing.
Okay.
I didn't know what that meant either. They were just ideas that I had in my head from watching movies and TV shows and stuff like that. But I loved conducting, and I actually worked on that a lot, which ended up being another really good thing that I did once I moved to New York and started pursuing Broadway, because almost every Broadway show has a conductor of some sort. So those were good skills that I acquired there too.
Did you wind up using those skills on Broadway?
I have been able to conduct some shows. It's been wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you got your degree and you said, you know what, did you think about going to LA or was it New York? How did you wind up getting to New York City?
It was a circuitous route. The woman that I was dating at the time when we both graduated from college, we took trips to each of the big cities, LA, Nashville, and New York, to get a feel for them and see where we might fit in. We originally decided on LA because she was going to be a model and I was going to do Hollywood soundtracks, film scores, and that kind of thing. So we almost moved to LA at the very last minute. She changed her mind and wanted to be a country singer. So and I was like, okay, whatever. I can go to Nashville. I can play. Country music was exploding as the most popular music in the country at the time. This was early 90s now. And I think Garth Brooks was on the scene and just redefining what country meant. And so we ended up moving to Nashville together. That's how I ended up there. I got a gig really pretty quickly and started touring right within probably a month or so of landing in Nashville.
Wow.
And so I spent the next 3 years basically on the road.
Who were you with?
I played with a country comedy duo called Pinkerton Bowden, who I didn't know at the time, but they were massive country stars. And they were, I call them the Weird Al Yankovic of country music, because they would take popular songs and rewrite the words to them in a highly hysterical fashion. I toured with them for about a year and a half. And then they stopped touring, and I immediately bounced onto another gig with an artist named Doug Stone, who at the time was known as the country balladeer. He sang all the love songs and had all these platinum records. It was really cool. I was touring all over the country with these big stars and playing big arenas. It was wild. But ultimately, I was on the bus and I didn't ever sleep in my own bed. I didn't see my girlfriend, who was back in Nashville. And this is before cell phones and the internet and everything. So it was really hard to keep in touch with your friends and family. And I felt so isolated being out on the road. I didn't like it, because you'd come back into town and maybe we'd have a week off and I'd try to play some gigs in town, but everybody would say, "Oh, you're out with Doug Stone, you're busy." And so they wouldn't call you. Even if you had a month off, we would get a month off in the winter or so, like around December, January, a month or two, that most of the artists would take off. And I could barely get arrested in Nashville because no one knew who I was, because, "Oh, you're one of the road guys." There were all these cliques. I was like, "You're a road guy." I wanted to be a studio guy. I wanted to be what they call them, the master sessions players, the A sessions. I think that's what they were called. And there were like 4 or 5 guys who did them all. Really? They were great drummers, all great, but they did them all because that was that clique. And the road guys did the road gigs. The session guys did the session gigs. And I was frustrated. I was like, but I don't want to just live on the road. I want to play sessions. I want to play with all these different people. And that's how I started thinking about what else I could do. What else is there for me to do other than be on the road and tour with country artists? So that's where the New York seed started to get planted.
When I went on a family reunion a couple of years ago, we drove down from here all the way to Eufaula, Alabama, and we stopped in Nashville for a day. We went down to the area. I forgot the name of that street where all the bars are.
Beale Street in Nashville?
Nashville.
Broadway.
Okay.
Yeah, Broadway.
Was there a bar scene click too? Everybody like our Bleecker Street or 6th Street in Austin?
Yeah, in Nashville, there's what they call Music Row. It was basically these 2 long streets in downtown, and they were full of old houses that had been turned into recording studios and publishing companies. So every house was like full of musicians and songwriters and players. And that's like where the whole music industry was, basically in Music Row. And you could just go up and down them and hear people writing the next big song that Reba McEntire was going to be singing or whatever. It was very cool. It's a very small town feel, even though it's a large city. And it was very approachable. I started producing and songwriting while I was there in Nashville, trying to break out and do more than just play on the road. And I was able to get meetings with every single country music label at the time, either with the A&R person or with the president of the label. I would walk in and play my songs or pitch my artists that I was producing with the president of a label. And that's unheard of. You wouldn't think to go to New York City and be able to have that kind of access to the big high-powered music executives the way that Nashville was. So I thought it was cool. Everybody was very friendly and an open door policy, so to speak. You had this access to the powerful players and people, the executives in the business, at least back then. I haven't been back there much, so I don't know what it's like these days.
What made you want to leave that?
It was like I was saying, when I was on the road, I was just exhausted, and I never felt like I got to know, like when you're doing one-nighters with Doug Stone, who's a huge star at the time, right? And so you're playing amphitheaters for 20,000 people, and it's really cool for that 2 hours that you're playing, but the rest of it is a grind. You are on the bus. You're usually driving overnight to the next town, so you're sleeping on the bus. When you pull into the next city, you don't have a lot of time to check the town out or see what's going on. I just felt like my life was passing me by without me enjoying it a whole lot, except for those 2 hours that we would get to play every night. Like you might do some radio drive time promo where you might have to get up at 5 a.m. and go to the radio station and perform a little on-air thing because you're promoting for ticket sales for that night's concert. And then you go back to the hotel and you maybe sleep for 2 hours, and then you go to the venue and you're setting up and you have sound check, and then you're eating some bad catering that's in the locker room at the arena that you're playing in that night. And then you wait, depending where you are on the bill, you might be one of the opening acts, or if you're the headliner, then you sit around and wait for your slot. I just didn't feel like I was living a whole lot. I felt like I was just getting through 22 hours of the day just to get to those 2 hours. And those 2 hours were great. But then it was all over again the next day, and you're away from your friends and family. And it might have just been the nature of that kind of touring, but I got really burnt out with it and depressed at when I would get back into town and no one would take me seriously as a drummer, as, oh yeah, let's call Larry to play the session next week for Garth Brooks or whatever, because, oh no, Larry's out with Doug Stone, so don't even call him. And I was getting really frustrated. And I was doing a jazz cruise, this one-off jazz cruise on a cruise ship where they, brought in all these jazz artists. And I was lucky enough to be there for this 1 week. And I met a bunch of cats from New York, a bunch of jazz cats. And they were asking me what I was doing in Nashville. And I was like, oh, I'm doing this and this, and when I'm frustrated. And they said, hey, if you ever come through New York, someone who can play all the stuff you do, if you play jazz and you play rock and you play pop, you probably work a lot in New York, because all the Broadway shows these days, they all have all these different styles in them. You should come and check it out. They planted the seed in my head. And luckily they were nice enough to say, if you ever come through New York, let me know, we'll get together. I actually did call up a couple of those guys that I met and made a special trip to New York just to check out the scene. They were so nice, and they introduced me to a couple people, and I went and sat in some Broadway pits.
What was the first show that you sat in and saw? Do you remember?
It was Damn Yankees. And it was with Ray Marchica, who is one of the greatest drummers in New York City still to this day. And he ended up being a mentor to me when I moved here, because I didn't know what I was doing. He had already been doing Broadway shows for a long time at that point. A very young David Chase was conducting. I think he had maybe just taken over the show before I sat there. I sat in that pit and I couldn't believe the level of musicianship. It was incredible. And what they were doing in there and how electric it was. This huge orchestra was all playing together in these big dance numbers, and there was a whole cast up on stage and everybody singing and dancing, and just they were swinging away so hard. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that this kind of cool music scene existed. And so it really opened my eyes to, and I started thinking about, maybe this is more my scene. I always wanted to live in New York. I love New York. Maybe I'll come here and I'll still conduct for movie scores, but I think I got to come here and check it out. Ray was so great. That band was so swinging.
What year was that?
I would say 95, maybe 94 or 95, somewhere around in there. And it took me a minute to get my nerve up and for the right moment to leave Doug Stone's band. I was the band leader with Doug Stone, so it was a hard gig to leave. I was making a ton of money. We had a great, back then you didn't leave a gig like that. When I finally did give my notice, everybody thought I was crazy. They were like, what are you doing? You got another gig? I was like, no, I'm going to move to New York. Everybody thought I was crazy, and I probably was, because I left a really great gig to come and do. I had no plan, but I had saved a lot of money. I saved $10,000, and I said, I'm moving to New York and I'm going to see what happens. And I'm not going to do anything else, but I'm going to see every show and meet every musician that I can. And I'm going to go to every jam session that I can find out that exists in town. And I'm just going to see if I can make something happen here, because I love it. I loved the energy of it.
So you saved $10,000, and in the first month it was gone, and then you had to.
It's really true. I stretched it out and made it last for 3 months. Seriously. And everybody needs to know how expensive it is to live in New York. And if you're not prepared to do any kind of survival jobs, you're going to burn through cash like nobody's business. But luckily for me, I had enough going on with my career before I got here that it opened some doors a bit quicker. I had met Ray Marchica. I'd met those two cats on the jazz cruise and then met Ray Marchica, and they introduced me to other people in the scene because they saw I was serious about it. Still, nobody really knew much about me except that, oh, you're the Nashville guy, right? I was like, no, I do everything. I didn't want to be pigeonholed. And I kept trying to tell everybody, I don't do just country music. I play everything. I play percussion. I conduct. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew when they met me that I could do all these different things. So I did my best to do that. I would get a little gig here and a little gig there and started to piece them all together, but they were all different. Like, I did do one country gig when I first moved to town, but then the next week I did a gig on timpani at a church or something. I just started trying to accumulate some New York credits, because that was one of the other things that I learned really quick was when I was meeting people in New York right away, they'd say, okay, what have you done? And I'd say, I did this and this. And then they'd say, no, but in New York, what have you done in New York? Because that's different. And I had somebody say straight out to me once, I don't care what you've done anywhere else, because that means nothing to me. Damn. I want to know what you've done in New York. And so until you've done something in New York, don't bother me. I had somebody lay it straight out to me like that.
Wow.
And I get it, because New York, especially Broadway, is unlike, and you know this, it's unlike any other scene anywhere else. It's its own world. And the stuff you are asked to do in theater is unlike what you'd be asked to do on any other gig. So it's very much its own world, and people need to know that you understand that world, that you take all your stuff that you know from all these other worlds, but that you put it together and understand what's needed for this world, the theatrical world.
So you started to subbing after that with help from Ray Marchica?
Yeah. And for me, I know that I was very lucky. I was very much in the right place, the right time, and I had met the right people. Ray introduced me to, he gave me a bunch of names of different Broadway musicians to go and sit in their pits at their shows, just to keep expanding my understanding of how different every show could be. And one of the names he gave me was Michael Hinton, who was the percussionist at the time at Miss Saigon, which was a huge, giant hit show at the time. It was really pretty soon. It was maybe within the first 2 months of me moving to New York, I met Michael Hinton. And I went and sat in the pit with him at Miss Saigon, and Howard Joynes was the drummer at the time. And I sat in there. They had a third of the orchestra pit was taken up by just the two of them. It was massive percussion and drum setup. They had every mallet instrument in there and every kind of gong and Asian instrument that you could think of in this show. And they continued to blow my mind with what they were doing, because they were playing a score that was written for 3 people just with the 2 of them. It was written for 3 percussionists in London in the original version, and they had to reduce it to 2 people for Broadway because of space. And I was just flabbergasted. I could barely keep up with the music because there are like 4 different staves of music. And I'm just like, this is the coolest thing. And Michael admitted to me later, he saw this look of joy and glee on my face that he hadn't seen from anybody before. Because most people would be terrified. And they told me that a lot of people would go into that pit and they would leave at intermission because they were so freaked out and overwhelmed by it. But I was like a kid in a candy store. There was like every kind of percussion instrument was in there. I just thought it was thrilling and I had the best time. So Michael started asking me a lot of questions after the show that night. And one of them was, do you think you could ever do something like this? And I said, well, yeah, I haven't played the mallet stuff since college and all the timpani and stuff. But yeah, I know how to do all this stuff. And he said, okay. And he gave me a copy of the music. And he gave me 2 cassette tapes of the show and said, all right, go learn it. Let me know when you're ready and I'll give you a date. And I was just floored. And luckily for me at the time, what I didn't know is that they had been having percussion subs, some go into that show over and just crash and burn and get fired. It was just such an unreasonably difficult book to play. And they couldn't find subs, especially on his book. They were having a really hard time. And most people would say no, because they were smarter than I was. They said, I'm not stepping into that lion's den. But I didn't know anything. And I was naive and I was optimistic and I was just full of joy that someone was giving me a shot. And so I went and I worked my butt off. And it took me a month. I worked every single day, 5 days a week. Back then at that theater, you could go into that theater. They had arranged to allow the percussionists to play in that pit during the day if there wasn't a rehearsal. And it was a really unheard of thing back then. Like, you didn't do that, but they knew this show was so difficult for the percussionists. They wanted to help them. So I would show up at 9 a.m. every morning and shed that book over and over for a month. And I finally learned it and felt ready. He gave me one show. I went in. Luckily, I nailed it. And the next day my phone was ringing because everybody in town knew that was the hardest show that had ever been written at that point. And if you survived that, you could do anything. And I knew it was my one shot, whatever. I didn't know how difficult it was. I didn't know the history. I didn't know anything. Luckily, I was naive about it. Otherwise, someone was going to put me on a Greyhound bus and send me out of town. I just knew the importance of that moment. And I put everything I had into that. And luckily it went well. And then it just snowballed from there.
You're lucky they didn't give you a ticket right back to Nashville.
I know. That's what I was worried about.
Port Authority's right down there.
And I thought that's what would happen if I didn't nail it. If I made one mistake, I thought I'd never get another shot. Like, I really felt the pressure of that. Luckily,
you survived, and then you started getting calls because people knew that you can do this particular kind of work. Did it lead to a show that you had of your own, or did you start subbing on many different shows? That was a percussion book that you were doing. Did you start subbing on drum set for anyone?
Yeah, I did. Luckily, I had another, as the Broadway world, everybody knows everybody, and word travels around very quickly. I had been sharing the studio space with some other Broadway drummers, a rehearsal space, and the boss of that studio, the guy who ran that room, was a guy named John Redsecker. He was playing a show called Beauty and the Beast at the time on drums. He had heard me playing drums. I'd be rehearsing in the studio. I was bothering him all the time. Hey, can I come and sit in the pit with you? And he let me come and sit in the pit with him. And once I played really well at Miss Saigon, he said, okay, I'll give you a shot at subbing for me. I needed a new sub and I'll give you a shot. He didn't really know my drum set playing. So he really put me through what was expected of a chair holder, which is being responsible for the chair and making sure that if you bring someone in to sub for you on that chair, that you're going to bring in a good musician and they're going to do a good job. So he had me play some stuff for him, and I watched the show probably 5 or 6 times or something like that. And that was the next book that I got to learn, which ended up also being a really good thing for me, because now not only did everybody know that I could play Miss Saigon, which was the hardest show in town, but that I could also play a very orchestral drum set and dance show. And so I went into sub there and did well there. And that helped me get even more work. The moral of that story is the more you can do, the more different things you can do, the more work you're going to get from then on. I just basically went from learning one book to the next book to the next book. And I was subbing 9 different books at one point. This is probably a year and a half down the road, maybe 2 years after I moved to town. I was subbing on 9 different books. I ended up subbing on the drum set book at Miss Saigon for Howie Joins. I subbed on the drum set book at Les Mis. And so I was doing percussion and drum set books all over town, subbing for them all. Eventually, the drummer at Jekyll and Hyde left because he got another show, and I was subbing that show. The conductor of that show asked if I would take over that chair when that drummer left. So that's how I got my first chair on Broadway, was I assumed a drum set and percussion book of an existing running show because I was subbing there.
So wait, you were doing 9 shows at the same time? Subbing 9 shows? Yeah. Like the Sean McDaniel before Sean McDaniel. The original SM.
That's right.
Sean was the second coming of you.
Did you interview Sean yet?
Yes, I did.
I met him in Dallas when he was, I think, probably 16 years old. And I had gone out on the Les Mis tour to give somebody a vacation for a week. And I walked out of the stage door after one of the shows, and there was Sean McDaniel standing, 16-year-old Sean McDaniel standing there saying, "Hey, Larry Lelli, I know who you are, and my name's Sean, and I'm going to come in from on Broadway someday." And I said, "Awesome, dude. Call me when you get to town." And he did. Like 4 or 5 years later, he called me after he'd gone to, I think, North Texas or something. And so by that point, I had already had a show of my own. I can't remember which one it was at the time, but I had him come for me. I was one of the guys who let him sub when he first moved to town. And then he did the same thing. He probably had 10 different books.
11, I think.
I'm not surprised.
Man.
It's chaotic when you're doing that because every pit is different and has a different vibe and a different style and a different sound and a completely different setup. You have to be able to go into whatever and just be that thing for that night. And then the next day, or sometimes you're that for the matinee, and then you go and play a different show that night. And you have to take that cap off. Say I was subbing for Clayton. I had to go in and beat Clayton that day, the matinee. And then I'm going to sub for Sean McDaniel that night. And I had to go be Sean that night in a completely different vibe and a different show, different feel, different sound, different kit. It's really challenging, but I loved it. I loved it.
So Jekyll and Hyde, you did that, and that ran for how many? Did it run for a couple
years? It
ran
for like another year and a half after I took it over. And I was very lucky back then because of all the people that I had been subbing for before I got that show. One of them was Paul Pizzuti, who is a great drummer and has done a ton of Broadway shows. One of the music directors he has worked for a long time was Stephen Sondheim's musical director, Paul Gemignani, who not many people know, but he started as a drummer. Paul Gemignani started his career as a drummer, and he rose up through the ranks to become one of the biggest legendary musical directors of all time for Broadway. And so when Jekyll and Hyde announced that it was closing, Paul Gemignani had a new show that was starting out that Paul had done all the workshops for. Paul had a really great show that he didn't want to leave at the time. He was playing at Kiss Me Kate, which was a big hit at the time. He didn't want to leave. And so Paul asked Paul Pizzuti, "Who should I get to play this new show that I got coming in?" And he said, "Oh, you should call Larry because Jekyll and Hyde's about to close. And that new show's got some country elements in it. And he'll know all about that stuff because he lived in Nashville. So you should call him." And so we got our closing notice at Jekyll and Hyde. And maybe days later, I get this call from Ron Seld, who was Gemignani's contractor, and left a message on my machine at home. This was back in the day when you had a cassette tape. I think I kept the cassette tape of this because it was, "Hey, Larry, this is Ron Seld. Paul Gemignani wants to meet you about a new show. Wants to come over next week. Let us know when you can come over and meet him next week." And I was freaking out because I had known of who Paul Gemignani was for a long time because of all the cast albums and stuff that I've been listening to at the library as a kid, always looking at who's playing on all the records, right? And so I was freaking out. And here I was going to go meet this legendary guy. What was going to happen? And he just had me come and meet him between shows one day at the theater that he was at. He basically just wanted to talk to me and see if I was a cool dude. He trusted Paul Pizzuti that I could play. He just wanted to know what kind of person I was. So I went in there, we chatted for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And then he said, "Okay, great. That's all I needed to know. I want you to do the gig. So Ron will call and give you the details." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is how it happens. You play one show and then it closes and then somebody knows your show closed. So they call you and you do the next one. And this is how it works, right? You just go from one to the next." I was like, this is amazing. And I'm working with Paul Gemignani now, one of my heroes. And I'm just over the moon. The short version of this really long story is the show ended up being not very good and very poorly received. And it closed in a few weeks.
Ooh.
And I was completely unemployed. And working with Gemignani was a dream come true. From that moment on, I would work with him anywhere. But that particular show was not a hit. It was a flop, as they call it. And we closed within weeks, and I had nothing. Nothing. I was like on unemployment. And I was served a dose of reality really quickly. Oh, this isn't how it always goes. You don't just go from gig to gig. And then I can't remember how long it was before I got my next show, but I was back to subbing. After that show that I did with Paul Gemignani was called Tom Sawyer. It was a beautiful little show, actually. The music was really good. It just, as a show, it wasn't working on stage for whatever reason. But I can't remember exactly, but it was probably a year or two before I got my next show. So I was back to subbing, freelancing for the next however long that was. The cool thing is you can go back to shows that are still running. I went back to Miss Saigon because that show was still running. So I went back to subbing there. But you have to learn all these new shows. And this is something we need to talk about, is the amount of time it takes to learn a show.
So how long does it take you to learn a show?
Every show's different, and it depends on how difficult it is. Miss Saigon took me a month working 5 days a week, almost 8 hours a day. When I wasn't in the pit working on that show, I was in my apartment air drumming, playing the score, listening to it, reading the music, and air drumming, doing what I needed to do. That was a really intense it was the hardest one I ever had to learn. But the fastest I ever had to learn a show was there was an emergency situation at How to Succeed in Business. That drummer was leaving and they really wanted me to take over the show, but I had never subbed there. I was working on another show and my show had just closed. So I was available. They knew I was available, but I needed to officially play the show once in order for the contractor to approve me for being hired, because I'd never played the show. They didn't want to hire me for that particular show without actually hearing me play the book. It was a quasi audition, but the audition was learn the show in 3 days and play it. And so I had to lock myself in a friend's garage I recreated the setup in my friend's garage. That was probably 12 to 14 hour days I spent for 3 days straight.
3 days. That's fast. Wow.
It was insane. It was insane. I don't know, man. Typically, it depends how busy you are too with life. If you're working a ton and you're freelancing all over the place, you have to grab practice time when you can to learn a show. So it could take a few weeks to learn a show, or other times there's a little more pressure and they need you to do one particular date that's maybe in a week, and you say, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't. You got to be honest about it. If someone asks you, hey, I need you to cover Saturday night because I got a gig with Sting at Madison Square Garden and I need to be off that night, you need to be able to say, yes, I can do it, or no, I can't. You don't want to say yes if you don't know that you can do it. Because if you show up Saturday night and sit in that chair, you better be able to bring the goods. Otherwise, Greyhound ticket out of town again. Broadway is unforgiving that way. New York's music scene overall, you've got to always show up with the goods. Because if you don't, there's a line of 20 other people, probably more, that will sit right on that seat and do what you couldn't do that night. And it's so competitive here.
Shannon Ford said you got to bring your A game.
Yeah,
always.
Exactly. No matter what it is, no matter what kind of gig you're doing.
So How to Succeed in Business.
Yeah.
You took over for that?
I did. I ended up taking over for that chair. That was a great show too. I love, that's what I ended up getting known for. If I was going to start to develop, what do I bring to the table? And I ended up being the guy who was really good for dance shows, because I studied big band music so much in school and I love playing for dancers. I also was lucky enough to get the drum chair on the Producers very early in my career here. I would say within the first 5 years I was here, I got the producer's gig. Huge dance show. And I loved that. I loved developing the drum books too. When you're the drummer on a dance show, they bring you in from the first rehearsal with all the dancers and the choreographer and the director. And you're in there making up the parts as you go along. Some days you don't even have sheet music. They just say, okay, this is a swing tune in the key of C. Just play along and do what you feel. There's a lot of that. So that's where, as I was talking before about learning by ear, learning to play by ear, that really helped me out a lot because I was just listening and playing along with what I was hearing. And then I learned to play along with what I was seeing on stage as they started staging the show. And the choreographers would say, hey, Larry, you know, when this dancer kicks their left leg up over their head like that, give me a little something. And so I had to make that up and figure out what that meant. And sometimes it was trial and error. No, I don't like that. Something that's more green. I want a green. I want to hear green here. That kind of stuff happens. It's for real. And you got to figure that out. But I loved it. I loved it.
So true. So speaking of that, did you originate the drum book for the producers?
No, I didn't. The original drummer was Cubby O'Brien.
Oh, that's right.
People may remember him as Cubby the Mouseketeer, the tap dancing Mouseketeer, because that was him. That was Cubby O'Brien. He was a great show drummer. Grew up playing all that stuff and all those TV variety shows back in the 70s, Sonny and Cher, and like Carpenters, all that stuff they would do back then, those variety hours. He was a great show drummer. So he originated that book and he left to go do another show with Bernadette Peters. And I had just started subbing there. And so it was another thing that like, I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. Had I not been subbing there, I probably wouldn't have taken over that gig. But luckily I had just started there and that conductor liked me and asked for me to take over the book when Cubby left. And that ended up being a great gig. I think it ran another 5 years or something after that. Yeah, it was great. It's such a fun show to play. Oh, so fun.
Being the chair holder for a couple different shows at this point, yeah. What did you look for when hiring subs to sub for you?
That's good. It depends on the show. Every show is different. And for the producers, we'll talk about the producers specifically. That show was so specific as far as what you played and how you played it, that as the chair holder on that show, I needed to know that a drummer could come in and do exactly what I was doing, that would have that level of attention to detail and was unflappable, because that conductor was also very particular as far as, well, that when you hit that dance kick, that has to be on that cymbal. Or you have to play it not on the bell of the ride, but right next to the bell of the ride. It was that kind of specifics on that book. So I needed to know, and actually that's maybe where Sean McDaniel started subbing for it. It might have been that show, because I knew Sean had that level of detail. He would come in and do exactly what I was doing. He would watch everything. He would notate it however he needed to notate it and come in there and replicate it. And that was the only way you were going to survive as a sub on that show. We also went through a lot of drum subs on that show because some people came in and tried to play that book and didn't. I know you said that it needs to be exactly. I do my thing. I would come in and do my thing. And they'd come in and do their thing. And I'd get a call at intermission saying, what'd you do sending this drummer in who doesn't play like you? So that was a really high pressure. And it was like you had to know the music so well that your eyes were on the conductor at all times, because there were slight tempo fluctuations that the dancers needed. Like this 8 bars was going to be at quarter note equals 120, but the next 8 bars was quarter note equals 126. And then the next 8 bars were quarter note equals 118. And you had to be able to do that. It wasn't just like you're sitting down and you're playing a recording session and there's a click track and you're just going to lock into that one tempo. You are constantly doing this the whole show. So you had to be on the conductor. And if you weren't on the conductor and right with them, almost anticipating what they were doing, you were gone. So there's those kind of shows.
You got that bus ticket.
back to Port Authority. Yeah.
Don't be the person that gets the bus ticket to Port Authority.
Exactly. But then there are other shows that are more laid back and that it's more about listening and settling into the groove of the show. Like we play, let's see, what's the show that I can think of?
$1 Million Quartet.
That's a great one. Great one, Clayton. That you had to be able to walk into that and sit down and lock in with those other 5 musicians. There were just 6 musicians in that show. We were all on stage. The actors were playing their instruments. You had to get on stage and be a band. And there was no conductor. You were basically the de facto conductor as the drummer because you were expected to know all the tempos and to lay it down. But you also had to lock in with the rest of the band. So you had an upright bassist doing the slap thing and 3 guitarists and a pianist playing all those great old tunes, those Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash tunes. You had to be a band member suddenly. So there are really varying degrees of what is going to be expected of you at every show. And that was another tough one to find subs for because you had to memorize the whole book because you were on stage, you were in costume. You had a couple of lines you had to say because you were also one of the actors on stage. You were the drummer in the Sun Records studio session. And so you had a few lines. You were expected to interact with the other people on stage. That was another hard chair to fill as far as finding subs who were open to that because a lot of Broadway cats just want to go into the orchestra pit, be invisible and anonymous, play their thing, and then go home. But here you had to show up and be in costume and be on stage and have good stage presence and be engaged and remember your lines and say them when you had to and all be memorized. So that was an extreme. We're talking extremes here, but that's what you got to be prepared for. If you're going to try to come to New York and you want to play on Broadway, you've got to be able to do all these different things. Good one. That was a good show to mention.
So the producers ran for a long time. You won 12 Tony Awards. Did you get to play on the Tony Awards for that show?
Not for that show because they had already won the award right before I took over that show. I did get to play on the Tony Awards on many of the other shows that I had done, and that's always a blast.
What was the first one that you did?
Oh, man. My memory's so bad. I remember Assassins was one of the first ones we got to play. We got to go in, and for people who don't know, you do a pre-record for the Tonys and for the performance that you're going to do on the show. I do remember this one very well because it was one of my first. It was not necessarily about the music. It was about the time. You had, I think it was 4 minutes or something. You had 4 minutes to perform your number. And so not only did they have to cut down the music from the show, whatever song they chose, but also we had to adjust the tempo slightly of that song to make it right in that 4 minute thing. And this was a show that I did with Paul Gemignani, and I always tell this story because it was so incredible to me. But we did the first run through, the first rehearsal of the song in the studio with the band and everything. And it came out to 4 minutes and 2 seconds or something. They came in, Paul, we got to shave off 2 seconds. And musically, we couldn't do it in a way that would make sense. He had to adjust it for the tempo in his head. And so he sat there for a second, and then we did the next take, and it was exactly 4 minutes.
Wow.
That's the level of musicianship that you're going to run into in the Broadway pits. It's incredible. It's mind-blowing.
Speaking of that, recording cast albums.
Yeah.
What was your first one that you did?
Oh, I think it was Into the Woods, another Gemignani show. I was not the percussionist on that show, but they added a percussionist for the recording session. I'm pretty sure that was the first one I did. That was maybe around 2000 or so. I'm pretty sure that was the first one. Before that, I had done a lot of concept albums, a lot of new shows. When they're developing a new show, they will want to record either all the music or some of it to pitch the show to investors to further develop the show and to actually fund a production of the show. And because I was meeting so many musicians at all the different pits that I was playing in, I was getting introduced to a lot of composers who wrote show music. And I'd get called to play demo sessions for a lot of shows. And a lot of them never saw the light of day. And then a lot of them did come through and got financed and funded and produced. But the first Broadway one, I'm pretty sure, was Into the Woods. That was great. It was thrilling. Sondheim was there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the level of musicianship is very high in these pits. And I get to meet some of my heroes that I remember listening to on records from back in the 70s and 80s. But when you're doing a cast recording, you don't have a lot of time. You just got to get it right the first time. The pressure is on, just like the pressure is on when you're doing a show. The pressure is on when you're doing a recording, but this is going to be there forever.
Exactly. So it's even its permanent record is for the posterity of that show. And you better not make a mistake. Because if you do, it's probably going to end up on the record.
Yes.
That's awful.
Have you listened to something that you've done? You're like, man, I wish I could have done that again. Or were you pretty happy with what you've recorded?
I'm typically very happy with the stuff that I've recorded. There's nothing out there that I did that I was like, oh, I wish I would have done that differently. But I did learn a very important lesson that first Tony Award session. Because Gemignani was so incredible, we got done with our session early. And we had an extra 20 minutes or something. And the take of the last section of the song involves a really intricate snare drum thing that's supposed to be locking up with the woodwinds. And it was just really messy when we put it down the first time. Like, not everybody could quite hear each other. The woodwinds were seeing it for like it was the second time they had played it. It just wasn't quite laying right. And I said to Gemignani, I said, hey, since we got time, what do you think if I just try to get that snare drum thing, I think I can get with where the woodwinds are a little better. I was at that point, I was trying to fit in with them rather than have them fit in with me for that section. And he said, I don't think you're going to get it any better than that. But if you want to, go ahead. And so he basically walked out of the session, of the studio, and said to the guy, Larry wants to do another pass on that. Let him do it. And so they played the playback of what we just recorded, and I listened to it, and I went in and did one more pass of the snare drum. I went out there and I said, okay, I think it's great. And Gemignani said to me, you're never going to hear that on a TV speaker anyway. You don't need to worry about that. This is where the Tony Awards. Most people are going to be listening on a little speaker on their TV. They're not going to hear your snare drum part. He was totally right. 100%. I learned a very important lesson then. Like, sometimes you're sweating over something that isn't going to make a difference in the big picture. You still got to show up and do your thing, but there's always a point where you go, okay, that's going to be fine. So that was an interesting lesson that day.
So when you have shows, have you ever sat out in the audience and watched the show with somebody else subbing for you?
Yeah, almost. That's a great question. Almost every show I do, I will try to do that if I can. Just because for what we're talking about here, it's very different when you're sitting there in the pit and you're making everything happen, as opposed to when you're out in the audience and it's part of a whole. There's part of a big painting, and everybody's got their little bits and parts. And you might be sweating on something in the pit so hard every night that in the big picture, it's not really that important. I did it at Miss Saigon because I started subbing at Miss Saigon so much that I really wanted to know what was going on with the show. So I went and saw that show several times from the house. I just bought a cheap ticket and stood in the back in the standing room or whatever and listened and watched the show so that I could understand how it all fit together. I think it's a really important thing to do. And anybody who really cares about their show will most likely try to do that at some point. It can be difficult financially because it's hard to give up a gig and buy a ticket to your own show.
Well, they don't give us free tickets, even
that's
though we're
right.
on the show.
There's no free tickets in Broadway, man. But I do like to do that as much as I can.
And I do it for every show that I'm in. Of course, I couldn't do it for Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill. I saw it on HBO, man, and I started crying at the end. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna die.
That was incredible. You guys were swinging, man. That was such a great show. Oh, I'm glad I came to see that show. That's the other thing that I do is I try to go and see all the other shows.
Yes, you do.
I really, not only to support all of our friends in the industry, but to see what's going on out there so that you can have a better perspective of what you're bringing to your own show or when you're subbing or whatever.
You and I were working in theaters right next to one another. I was working at Memphis and you were at $1 Million Quartet. I don't know it wasn't was it next to ours? Were you guys next to us?
No, not that one. But we were the same year. That was the same year.
Yes, the same year.
$1 Million Quartet.
You weren't next to. What theater were you in?
We were in the Nederlander, a couple blocks down from you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, on 41st Street.
Yes.
But we saw each other all the time because when your show is in the same season as another show, or when shows are in the same season, you do all the same stuff together. And I think we had the same producer. So we did a lot of promotional stuff together. Yeah, I remember meeting everybody at your show. I made friends with a lot of the people at your show because we saw each other so often. We were always doing the same promo things or concerts or whatever. Yeah.
But it's rare that if you're fortunate to be part of a show that's nominated for the Tonys, it's such a rewarding and exciting time.
Yeah. And
exactly.
You're constantly doing stuff.
Yeah, you can't take off. You got to do all this promotion and recordings and then do the Tony Awards, which is exciting.
Yeah.
But man, it does take a lot out.
We should probably talk about that so people know. Have you talked about the lock-in period that exists?
I have not.
For sure.
Talk about that.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So tell everybody what the lock-in period is and why that's important.
When you're starting a brand new show, and especially for us drummers who may be involved from the first rehearsal with the dancers, you are required to be there essentially from that first rehearsal all the way through opening. And they can ask you to stay even longer if the show gets nominated for Tony Awards, because they know all the Tony voters are going to come to the show and they don't necessarily want people subbing out really important chairs in the orchestra, like the lead trumpet or the drummer or the conductor, while all the Tony voters are coming to decide whether you're going to win the Tony or not. So that period can last. I think the longest one I did was 4 months, where you have to show up and play every show, every rehearsal. You are technically locked in. It's a union rule. It's in our contract. You're not allowed to take off. And it's brutal because you may be playing dance rehearsals all day for 8 hours, and then you do a show that night for another 3 hours. So you can be playing 12-hour days easy. And then you have a 2-show day, and then you get 1 day off where you basically sleep and fall into a pile somewhere and try to recover. But it's really hard, and it's expected of us as drummers to be able to do that. And people got to know about that kind of commitment that you're going to have. So you're not going to see your family a whole lot. It's a rough time to get through. And you do that for every show. And you have to learn how to work on your endurance so that you can make it playing those marathon days and marathon weeks. You do that 6 days a week.
Yes.
In order to have something to give on that last show, that last day, you have to pace yourself. You have to learn how to physically pace yourself and have the stamina to get through that. It's
another thing that I haven't really talked about is pacing yourself. Look, if you have a show that is stable, Come From Away or Ain't Too Proud, you can't go in there blasting away every night. You have to make sure that you play at a certain volume and with a certain amount of technique so that you don't hurt your hands. These things are going to keep you employed. I find myself searching for the right instrument to use, whether it's the right head, snare, or stick. So you have to find the right way to make sure that you are eating, that you're getting a lot of rest, that you're getting exercise, because your body is part of your instrument. But also the tools that you use have to be proper in order for you to make sure that you make the right sounds that supports the dancers and the orchestra, but also helps you get from January of 2021 to December of 2021.
Exactly. It's so important. And I think not a lot of people talk about that kind of stuff, especially about the equipment side of things, where the instruments and implements that you choose do have an effect on what you are physically able to do or what you are physically putting out. And like you said, if you bring in your 2Bs drumsticks in there and you're bashing away like you were playing a session for one day and then you weren't going to do it again, you're never going to make it doing 8 shows a week, 365 days a year. It's crazy. You have to learn about how to use your body efficiently, because it is a very physical thing that we are doing, and to use the equipment that's going to be best suited for your gig.
Moving forward from $1 Million Quartet, what was the next thing you did?
Then I did How to Succeed in Business. That's when I took over that book at How to Succeed in Business, which was a blast because that was a big band show with swing tunes and dance numbers, dancers. I love that. Yeah. After that,
was Assassins and the Producers after $1 Million Quartet?
Those were before.
Okay.
So $1 Million Quartet was when Memphis was out. So that was 2010, I think, right?
2010.
Yeah. Yeah. Then How to Succeed was 2011 into 2012, I think. That sounds right. And then I did a show called A Christmas Story, which was based on that TV movie, which is how I met Ian Eisendrath, who is my music supervisor for Come From Away. And that's another thing we can talk about is who you know and how you meet them, and it will define your career path. And it can go many ways. It can go like you meet somebody, you have a great working relationship, and you will continue to work with them then on and off for years. Or you will meet somebody and realize you guys don't work well together for whatever reason, and then you won't work with them anymore. But Ian and I, we loved working together on A Christmas Story. Only ran for 2 months because it was a seasonal show. But it was a great time, and that was another big band swing show. So we had a lot of fun on that. But meeting him there, then he and I have worked together several times since then because I love working with him. If I love working with a supervisor or a particular contractor, when they call me and they have a gig for me, I will usually put a lot of weight into that when I'm deciding to say yes or no to a certain gig. A lot of it is knowing that I know Ian and I know he's going to hire great musicians. It's going to be a great project. If he's involved with it, it's going to be a fun time. So I will be able to base decisions on that. It was great that I met him then because it's led to a lot of other really fun projects that we've done together.
How did you get Come From Away? I know it was through Ian.
Yes. When he was in Seattle, they were working on the show and doing what we call an out-of-town tryout, which happens for most shows these days. They still will go somewhere outside of New York and put the show up on its feet for the first time in front of an audience while they're still working on the show a lot. This is a funny story because he called me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this show called Come From Away. The producers have said we're coming into Broadway, and I really want you to do it when we come into New York, but I'm going to need you to do an out of town." And I said, "Okay, I don't love going out of town." And I said, "What's it about?" And he said, "So it's about 9/11. And I pretty much cut him off. I said, "What? What are you talking about? A show about 9/11? How dare you? This is awful. This is a terrible idea." I'm just like going, "Oh, I don't know anything about it." He said, "No, you don't get it. It's not really about 9/11. So the thing, it's a really great story." And I just wasn't having it at the time. And he eventually convinced me to come to Seattle to see a performance of it. Like he was like, "You trust me, you come and see the show. It's going to change your mind." And I was like, "Okay, I have one day off." And I flew out there on a red eye and saw the show, said, "I'm so sorry. This is a brilliant show. I can't believe that I was such an idiot. I have to do this show. Thank you so much for offering this show to me. I'll do whatever." It was so clearly a brilliant hit to taking the show. And that's how a lot of, I don't know if you probably have talked about this some too, but there aren't a lot of auditions that happen for drummers to get shows. It's pretty much you've got to know somebody or somebody's got to know you or know of you to get called for a Broadway chair and or to sub, even to sub. It's a kind of a catch-22. You have to, these people have to know you and have to know you're good, but how do they know you're good until you've played a gig? It's one of those kind of things. So luckily for me at that point, we had a working relationship and he knew I would be the right call for that show, that he would just be able to offer me the job like that. Have you done some auditions? I've done a couple times I've had to go in and play for a music director who didn't know either me or was from out of town and didn't have a particular drummer that they wanted to work with. And so the contractor would call together a small list of players to audition for the music director. I've had to do those a couple times, but it's very rare. Have you ever had to do that?
No, I don't think I have.
So it's a tricky thing. But I tell everybody when they're asking me about, like, how do you get hired for a show? You just have to play every gig you possibly can. And eventually someone is going to hear you, someone's going to play with you and going to recommend you as long as you're doing a good job, which is what Shannon Ford said as well. You got to bring your A game, no matter what the gig is. When I was in Nashville and I got hired for that first band, I was playing at a jam session at a club. I played 2 songs. And somebody heard me and came up to me afterward and said, "Hey, I don't know you. What's your name?" And I said, "It's Larry. I just moved here. I just moved to town a couple weeks ago." And that's how I got an audition that got me that gig, just by playing a couple tunes at a jam session. So you always got to bring your A game. You got to play as many gigs as you can. And then eventually you'll work your way up and hopefully to where enough people know you that they will call you and offer you a gig. That's the goal, at least.
I think I asked this to Sean McDaniel. Have you brought in someone to sub for you at any of your shows that has never done a Broadway show before?
Yes. And actually, I pride myself on that because when I moved to town, nobody knew me from Adam. And I was given a chance by Michael Hinton, an unknown person, not new to the scene, and I was given an opportunity to play. And I've tried to pay that forward ever since. He and I talked about that at one point, a couple of years after I'd been to town. I said, we were having dinner, and I was like, how could I ever thank you for, you opened the door for me, and now I have this whole career within the Broadway community. How can I ever thank you? And he said, you will do the same for somebody else. You will open the door for another young person who came to town who wants to do what you're doing. And I took that to heart. And I'm so proud to have started so many young musicians in this business. But what I also do is I will assess where somebody is. And I also like to mentor young musicians. And if someone approaches me and said, hey, I want to, like Sean McDaniel, hey, I want to play on Broadway, I will assess where they are, what they've done. I will coach young players who want to take coaching sessions with me or whatever. But I will encourage them and feed them gigs that I can, that based on their level of experience. And so a lot of young players, I will say, okay, great, you want to play on Broadway, but that means you've got to first play a musical of some sort. And you haven't played a musical ever in your life, and you just showed up in New York fresh out of college and you said you want to play on Broadway. You've got to play a show somewhere. So I will try to find an opportunity for them to play, whether it's at a community theater, a regional theater, a middle school who needs a drummer for their production of Camelot. I will feed young players gigs so that they can gain experience. And then I will check in with the music director of that gig or of people who were involved. Hey, how did it go? How did they do? And then continue to feed them other gigs that might help them along their progression if their goal is Broadway. You can't just show up knocking on Broadway's door and expect to come in there and know what you're doing. You've got to play some music somewhere first. You've got to do some gigs. You got to play a wedding gig or a bar mitzvah or an Easter Sunday church service. You've got to have done some stuff before you just show up.
A lot of young people want to graduate from high school and do what we do
without
having done any of that other stuff. You just don't graduate and come. It's like you graduate a business school and expect to work at a high-powered accounting firm. You just don't walk in and do that because there are steps to take.
Sometimes people call it paying dues, but it's really gaining experience.
Yes.
You've got to play somewhere where there's less pressure. It's not the level of musicianship isn't necessarily expected to be that you're going to come in and ace it and not make a single mistake. You've got to start somewhere. What do they call it in baseball? The minor leagues. You got to get some experience so that when you are asked to come in and sit down and ain't too proud, you know you're going to be able to bring it because you have that confidence and experience behind it.
There are a lot of great musicians in these pits.
Yeah.
They come in and play it. They might be the greatest jazz musicians in the world, right, but it's a completely different animal coming in and playing shows. And there have been people that have come in and they have gotten fired during intermission. And there are people that I've known that are great, legendary jazz musicians, and they come in and they can't cut it because either they didn't put the time in order to learn the show and internalize the music, and then of course pay attention to the conductor. The conductor's waving and pointing towards the player, and they're just sitting there, their head is in the music.
Yeah.
Listen to what this man is saying right here. Which brings me to, what are some of the things that you feel that a drummer should never do in a Broadway pit?
Man, you should never show up with your dinner and pull out a slice of pizza, a can of soda or whatever, and just like start. There is somebody who did that to me once. They were just watching the show. They showed up to watch the book, as you do when you're going to learn. So they had expressed interest in learning the show. And I said, yeah, sure, come in and you can watch the book and then we can see what you feel. And they came in and they literally had a sandwich and they're making all this noise with the wrapping paper. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? There are people out there. People can hear you. So you have to have a sense of professionalism and decorum. You don't want to come in and vibe everybody out. You've got to be a kind and good person. You got to be nice to be around. You got to be pleasant. You want to be courteous. You want to be respectful of your other musicians, especially if you're coming in as a sub. This is their home. You're a guest who's invited into somebody's home when you're at a pit in a Broadway show. And you should be very aware of the vibe of that pit. Some pits are quiet and they like for everybody to just stay in their lane and do their job. And then some pits are more rambunctious and there's more a fiesta kind of attitude where they want you to have fun and bring a little bit of your own thing. But you've got to know that, what's appropriate for that situation. So you've got to be really conscientious and aware of the situation you're walking into and fit in with that. Because they don't want, if you're distracting in any way, whether it's with your playing, you're going to play your latest Vinnie Colaiuta lick in your 2-bar solo break that the dancers have, and they all get lost on stage because they don't know what the heck you just played. Like, where's the one? And you were like, oh man, I'm doing my 7/4 things. You're not coming back. You got to be aware of the situation you're walking into and defer to that vibe that's already been established. That pit is the way it is, and that's how they want it to be. You're not going to come in and change it as a sub.
I have a few more questions, and I'm going to let you go. Just one thing. What piece of advice would you give to anyone interested in playing Broadway musicals? Okay, bits of what we've talked about up till now, being as well-rounded as a musician as you possibly can, no matter what instrument you play. But if we're specifically talking about drummers and percussionists, you better have some skills on all those instruments, as many as you possibly can, because that's what's going to enable you to work more. A lot of the books are getting more combined as orchestras tend to shrink over the years, unfortunately, which puts more pressure on the drummer and the percussionist to be able to have more skills. And that extends beyond just the acoustic instruments that we play as a drummer or percussionist. Electronics are in the scene and on most shows, and you better be able to play along to a click track like you've been doing it since you were born. You should have some abilities to
work with and create drum loops or rhythm programming, and that kind of stuff. Sequencing, all that stuff is happening now in many of the Broadway pits. So you add that all onto, hopefully what we've talked about is bringing all these different musical experiences that you've had to the Broadway pit. Because you played in a wedding band, you played those bar mitzvahs, you played in an Oktoberfest beer garden with a German polka band. You should do everything you possibly can so that you're informed and experienced. If you happen to be called for a Broadway show and they're in the dance rehearsal room and they say, "Hey, Larry, can you play some sort of polka beat for us?" You better know what that is. Or if they say, "We want a Dixieland, play a Dixieland shuffle here," you better know what that is. So it's not just having all your chops together and having all your licks and that kind of stuff. You've got to be able to play all those styles because you're going to be asked for it. Good question.
You use Yamaha drums.
Oh, yeah. Ever and ever.
So if Sonar said, "Look, I got this fantastic drum set.
Yeah.
I want you to swap it out," you'd say, "No, I'm good."
I would say, no, I'm good. I've had many opportunities from other drum manufacturers to check out their stuff or to switch or all that kind of stuff. And Yamaha makes the best gear, best drum gear, the best hardware. They always have, they always will. Their commitment to quality is unmatched. And I've played on all the other stuff too. I've had to, because sometimes you're doing a rehearsal and they provide a rental kit for you and you've got to come in, like you did the other night at that club gig you did. You played on whatever house kit was there and you were like, "Oh man, this is a drag." You were struggling with it because it wasn't the quality that you're used to. And for me, Yamaha has that quality. It's got the sound, the variety of different drum lines that they make. I can always find the sound that I need for whatever particular show. I've got the Absolute Maple hybrids, which are perfect for that show. But the show before that, I used the Birch, the recording custom drums, because that was the sound that I needed for that show. Or for the $1 Million Quartet, I used the Tour custom line because that's the sound I needed for that show. They make something for everybody. But it's the quality that will keep me there forever, because I know that I can show up and play on those drums. I've come from a ways, been running for 4 years now. That drum is going to sound the way it sounded on day one of that gig. And I know the hardware isn't going to fall apart and break and make me crazy. For me, it's the best quality drum around and hardware. Yeah.
So for years, I've been using Zildjian cymbals, but I don't have any endorsements with Yamaha or Zildjian or Remo just yet. But a lot of my colleagues are using Sabian. And when I hear people talking about Sabian, I was like, maybe I should rethink this. But you've used Sabian for a while. Why Sabian and not some other company?
What Sabian does for me is they make such a large variety of cymbals that, again, I know I can find whatever specifically I need. A sound nerd this way. I'm part of what I bring. When someone calls me to play for their show, they're calling me because I have this knowledge of sound, of styles of the shows. And they know that I'm going to pick the proper equipment to produce the proper sound for that show. Like we keep talking about $1 Million Quartet. It was such a specific sound to that show. Those albums that were recorded back then were recorded with one room microphone for the whole drum set, maybe 6 feet away from the drums. But the drums and the cymbals that I use, and we're talking Sabian right now, I can go through the Sabian catalog and find exactly the cymbal that will be the right sound for that genre of music. For $1 Million Quartet, that was for a vintage kind of sound. They make their the AX line and the HHX line. That's some extra hammering that are done on those cymbals that creates an aged sound to them. Even though the cymbal might be brand new, it sounds more vintagey. And for the show that I'm doing now, they're all, because it's so much like a film score, and there are all these ethereal sounds and feelings they're trying to evoke from the music. I've got 3 different ozone cymbals from the Sabian HHX line, 3 different sizes to create different sonic textures and tonalities. So I get really into it with the sounds, and Sabian's got everything. I've never run into a problem where I was like, oh, I can't find that sound I need. And they still make things the old-fashioned way. They're up in the factory in Canada. There are still cymbal artisans who sit there for 8 hours a day with a cymbal and a hammer on a wooden log, and they're hand hammering the cymbals. I think they're the only company that still does that, because it takes a lot of time. It might take hours to create that cymbal, where the other cymbal manufacturers are just punching them out and doing machine hammering, and so they can churn out more products faster. Sabian still puts those artisan skilled craftspeople into making their instruments, especially the hand hammered line. I just love that. And I hear the difference.
Man, I might have to like give them a call and be like, look, man,
check them out. A lot of Broadway musicians are using Sabian cymbals now, a lot of them, because they found those same things. And the quality is so consistent. They don't put out a cymbal and it's a lemon. And I have had experiences with the other cymbal manufacturers where I was like, this is just a lemon. There's nothing good about this cymbal. But yeah, Sabian, I've never had that issue with them.
So in the past, you've worked with several different artists, Josh Groban, Nick Jonas, Melissa Etheridge, Vanessa Williams, Audra McDonald, Neil Patrick Harris. What kind of things are you working on right now other than the show? Are you working on any specific music projects, or are you concentrating on Come From Way right now?
What I've started doing over the past few years is I've ventured into producing, because I've fallen in love with the theater so much and love it so much that I wanted to be a part of creating it in a deeper level. So I've gotten into the producing end. I was very lucky to meet some great producers 20 years ago. It was the producers of The Producers, that show, who I first met. And I started talking to them about, how do they do this? How do they put together this? How do you go about it? How do you go from finding the idea of a show and then hiring people to write it and raising the money and procuring a theater and hiring all the talent? I got fascinated with the whole industry of Broadway and musical theater. So that's what I've been putting a lot of my time and attention into right now. In addition to, I contract musicians for other shows. I act as a music coordinator or as a music supervisor or as a music director. Those are mostly for one-off concerts kind of things, but I've had a handful of artists that I like to work with a lot, and who either tour or they perform their own concert series here in town, like Laura Osnes, when she did her last run at 54 Below. This was back before the pandemic. I would not only play for her, but contract the rest of the orchestra in tandem with the music director, coordinate events and shows and concerts.
Do you still conduct any Broadway shows?
Yeah, I did. I've done several. The Producers, that was the first one that I got to learn. That was a thrill. And then I was actually served as the associate conductor at Hal Joey, and another one called The People in the Picture. And then I conducted at How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. That was with Daniel Radcliffe when he was starring in that show. That was a thrill. I just love to do it. And something to tell other drummers out there, it's a really good skill to have. I basically followed Gemignani. Paul Gemignani was such a hero of mine back in the day that I aspired to do that. He rose from the drum chair to being Stephen Sondheim's longtime musical director and conductor. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And when he and I would talk about it, it made sense, because as the drummer, all the tempo's already. So who better than to stand up there and actually conduct the show when someone's needed to fill in for the main conductor? And I know many conductors like Gemignani who have gone on, left the drums behind to be a conductor full time. I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I don't think that's my journey anymore, especially since the film session world dried up pretty much when I got here. There isn't a lot of that going on anymore. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to get to conduct some Broadway shows. It's a thrill, and I just love it.
It's fascinating, man. If you're conducting and you've played drums, Dennis Arcano was one of the guests on the show, and he expressed his experience being a conductor and what he looks for in a drummer. Is there something that you look for when you're conducting from the drummer?
Yeah, absolutely. I look for someone who's going to be following me, who I can look at any moment in time and know I have their attention, because I might need to move something just slightly because one of the singers is late for their entrance, or we have to vamp on one measure of music because the lighting change didn't happen yet, or the curtain didn't go up. All these weird things that are happening on stage that you might not know are going on when you're sitting in the orchestra pit. But I need to know that a drummer is right with me so that I can look at them at any moment in time and ask them to help me, because this is also something that we talk about all the time in the industry, is that connection, that relationship between the drummer and the conductor. Because when you're the conductor, you've got no power with that little stick. You can't do anything. But when you're the drummer, you have ultimate power. You can fix anything that goes wrong in an instant, or you can drive that whole bus into the ditch. You have all the power because you are making all that sound, and you are usually the loudest, one of the most important instruments in the orchestra as far as laying the foundation of what everyone else is going to listen to and play to and lock in with as the drummer. So if the conductor doesn't have that drummer right in their back pocket with them, you're screwed. So it's a super important relationship. And it's why we talk a lot about, as drummers, how important it is to be locked in with that conductor.
One last question. Where can people find you on social media? Website, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, TikTok? You a social media king, or?
I do a bit of it, yeah, but I'm pretty easy to find. If people just, my website is LarryLelli.com, and all my social media is just my name. So anybody who wants to find me, it can find me, unfortunately or fortunately.
That's great. So much fun talking to you. We can go and talk about so many other things like put-in rehearsals.
Yeah, there's so much. But this is so great you're doing this, man. It's important information, and you're doing a huge service for young, aspiring up-and-comers, because you and I had to learn this the hard way through trial and error and jumping into the deep end of the pool. This is going to be so helpful for players who are thinking about doing this for a career and can come in with some really good knowledge and awareness of what they're getting into. For some people, it'll inform them that they don't want to travel and get into this line of business. But it's really wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing it, man. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, Larry.
Okay. Thanks, Clayton.
Clayton Craddock here. I need your support to help keep Broadway Drumming 101 alive and growing. This platform is all about giving real, practical advice to musicians who want to succeed, not just on Broadway, but in their careers overall. You can subscribe to Broadway Drumming 101 for just $10 a month or $100 a year. You can get access to exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. When you support Broadway Drumming 101, you're not just backing the site, you're investing in a community of musicians who are serious about their craft. Every contribution makes a huge difference. Thank you for listening to Broadway Drumming 101.